Great, so we still have people joining, and thanks for typing in where you're zooming in from. It's great to see where everyone is in Colorado and central North Dakota, some locals in Gunnison and Boulder and Denver and Evergreen and Steamboat.
Can everyone see my screen? Yes? Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. I think so we're 2 minutes in, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining our monthly meeting. We're excited to have you. We have an exciting topic tonight, land regeneration through holistic planned grazing. I'm Michaela Blanton. Most of you probably know me by now. I'm the intern for 350's Regenerative Ag and Local Food Committee. And I'm going to hand it off to Annie Bill, who is one of our fantastic committee members who organized this entire thing and is going to facilitate tonight's event. So thanks so much, Annie. Oh, and I just want to let everyone know we are recording. So if you're uncomfortable with that, please turn your video off. Thank you.
Thank you, Michaela, and welcome everyone. My name's Annie Beal, and I am on the 350 Colorado Local Food and Regenerative Ag Committee with Michaela. And I'm coming to you from Gunnison, Colorado with the Colorado Regenerative Network. And I'm really excited to share with y'all today both these networks that I get to be a part of and invite you all to be a part of both of them as well. And Michaela will be guiding the next slides, and she's been guiding a ton of the information that she thinks that people want to know about. So thank you, Michaela, for offering your advice, getting this webinar all set up. And you can go on to the next slide, Michaela. And thanks everybody for continuing to enter in where you're together. It's going to be a fast 75 minutes. And then pretty quickly, MJ Pickett, who was our hub leader for our Colorado Regenerative Network, is going to do an introduction to holistic management. And then we'll break out into, well, we won't break out in any groups or anything, but then we'll have our panel sections where our guests tonight will share about their operations, and they will describe how they utilize holistic management practices and principles in all of their different operations and where they are in Colorado. And then at 7:50, we'll jump into questions from you all or anything that I gather that I think y'all might be interested in hearing if it doesn't get said in our quick orientations. And you'll see in the chat that Cloe Parker has welcomed everybody. And Michaela, you can go to the next slide. Cloe Parker is a part of our network here and started the network. And if you have questions along the way towards a panelist or towards the content that MJ is presenting, please go ahead and type it into the chat. And Kelly will hopefully be able to answer that directly, or she'll save it to really present to the panelists. So if something comes up that you need a little clarification about, go ahead and type it in. And we'll try to not have that be too distracting, to distract from the content that's happening, but I think it'll work out just fine. So we'll continue from here. If you go to the next slide, Michaela. Great. I'm going to quickly introduce the Colorado Regenerative Network, the CRN, and we are the Savory hub for the Colorado region. And so Savory Institute is a global network of holistic management practitioners, and there are hubs all around the world. And the idea for the hubs are that they are regional and grassroots organizations and groups of people that determine what holistic management and regenerative agriculture looks like for their region. And so we get to be the hub, and this was formed by MJ Pickett and the Parkers a few years ago, where they can take the information from Savory and the global network, utilize those tips and practices, and figure out what works for Colorado regions and the areas that they're ranching. And the idea for the network is to gather how these practitioners are learning from the land and start to share regenerative practices with the rest of the region. So it's our mission to educate and share about what this looks like on the ground. And now you'll get to hear from our practitioners in our network directly, and we'll get started from MJ Pickett. You can go to the next slide. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining from all across the state. It's really exciting to see so many different places tuning in. I'm just going to spend the next few minutes briefly describing what holistic management is, so that you have a better, hopefully, understanding of what we're talking about when we talk about tools in our region and in our practices and in our operations. So this is going to be a very quick overview. If there's any clarification points, please feel free to use the chat and we can try to address those. But I wanted to share that holistic management is a tool for regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture, the commonly accepted definition includes practices that build soil, soil fertility, and soil health. They also include or increase water percolation and water retention, and then increases biodiversity, ecosystem health, and resiliency. So we think that holistic management is a really great tool to move us towards that, move our operations and our management practices towards that. But holistic management is a framework. It is not just rotational grazing. It is not a prescription on how you should manage your animals or your operation. And it's not used alone in a vacuum. Holistic management really takes into account the whole, right? The whole of our environment, of our communities, of our economies. Holistic management, what we think is so fantastic about it is that it allows us to think systematically for better decision making, because it helps take into account the complexities of our everyday decisions for our operations, for how we manage our animals and our land. And we recognize that our world and our operations, how we manage things, don't happen in a silo. They're very interconnected. And this framework, that's what we refer to as holistic management, enables us to think about and think through how these decisions are made, how it affects others around us, whether that's economically, ecologically, or socially, personally, right? That community piece. So this framework, what we're seeing this tool help to increase production. We're seeing it help to increase carrying capacity on the landscape. We're seeing it increase water holding capacity within the soil. We're also seeing it increase profit for operations in communities. And I think most importantly, in improving the ecosystems where these practices are taking place. Holistic management, if you get anything from that, is a tool that allows practitioners to think through decision making when it comes to their operations. So we'll go to the next slide. And this tool really comes with the basis of 4 insights or 4 ecological insights. The first one being holism. So this top left corner, we have all these tiny little Legos, all these pieces, that maybe separately don't make up a whole. And what we recognize is that individual parts don't exist in nature, and wholes or they don't exist in nature, and wholes are what make up our ecosystems. So we recognize and understand the interconnectedness of what we do and how we manage our land. So if you hit click right here, we recognize that these parts and pieces make up our whole environment, our whole ecosystem. So I like to think of it as Legos. We're the sum of all those parts. So keeping that in mind when we're making some of our decisions. The next key insight is the brittleness scale. And brittleness really refers to moisture, available moisture in the environment at any given time. So you can think of a non-brittle environment as a rainforest, for instance, where water is available to help the life that supports decomposition at any given time. And a brittle environment would be a desert where there's not moisture available to start that decomposition process. So if you think of the brittleness scale, we think of it 1 to 10, 1 being a rainforest, 10 being the desert. And in Colorado, we tend brittle, so anything greater than 5 on that scale. And why that's important to think about, especially in our context, is, we have animals and the rumens of these animals that are that brittle environment, that their stomachs, their rumens are the places where that decomposition is mainly happening. So this top right corner, we have a cow coming in, grazing on grass, and the grass moving through its system. Those microbes are living in their system, helping that decomposition process get started. Then they poop on the land, and that's our non-brittle environment that's assisting the mineral cycle that's happening. The next ecological insight is in this bottom left-hand corner, and that's what we refer to as the predator-prey connection. So if we think of the lands and how they co-evolved, grasslands co-evolved with high numbers of herding animals or ungulates moving across the landscape with pressure from predators. So for instance, large herds of elk, mule deer, and bison moving across the land relatively quickly because they're being chased by these predators. So thinking through, how do we mimic that in our practices? And then the fourth and final insight really has to do with timing. Timing is everything. The big push against animals, particularly cows, on our landscape is that they're overgrazed. Well, we recognize that timing rather than numbers really governs whether a landscape is being overgrazed or overtrampled, over impacted. So the idea that understanding overgrazing of plants happens one plant at a time and not at a landscape scale. We can start to understand, how do we move across a landscape? How do we look at the plants and their need for recovery, how long they might need, so that we refer to that as the recovery rate. Helps to, again, make these decisions. So these 4 ecological insights, or these 4 insights, are really what set the groundwork for how we look at our landscapes, how we monitor, and how we make decisions on animals when and how they're on a land or on a piece of land. So these insights help inform our tools. If you can hit the next button. These tools include human creativity, money and labor, we can throw things like that at it. But when we think of holistic planned grazing, we're really looking at this centerpiece here, where we have technology that can help. We have fire that could potentially help move a landscape forward. We have rest. We see a lot of rest across the West, where the grasses are over rested. So instead of being trampled down onto the ground, where they are come in contact with soil and then start the carbon is sucked into the soil, they end up oxidizing, and that's over resting. And then we have the tools of living organisms, right? And this is what we're here to talk about mainly today, is using our animals as tools for grazing, for looking at animal impact, and that sort of thing. So that was really quick, really rushed, but hopefully gave you a decent understanding of where we're coming from when we're talking about holistic management and the tools at our disposal that help us move our landscapes and our operations to trend regenerative. So with that, I believe we're gonna jump into just kind of overview of our operations.
Hello, everybody. I am Cloe Parker. My parents, Bill and Kelly Parker, started Parker Pastures, which we raised regeneratively raised grass-fed beef and lamb. And because of my amazing parents, and because I love ranching and regenerative agriculture and holistic management and making the land better by managing our animals, and in return also producing incredible beef and lamb, I started our lamb portion of Parker Pastures. So to give you a little bit of a background, I run our lamb operation, and then I also do a lot of the marketing and social media for Parker Pastures, as well as the main cowgirl or kind of manager of doing like the day-to-day moves of the cattle and sheep. So that is kind of what I do at Parker Pastures. So our operation, and you will later hear my dad, Bill Parker, talk more about this. Our operation is founded upon the belief and principle and actions of regenerative agriculture, because we believe in leaving the world better than we found it, not in with the land, with our communities, with those around us. And we believe in making ourselves also for each day, which is also an important part of like holistic management and regenerative agriculture. Is it's not just about the animals or the land, it's also about our communities and the world and each other, and becoming better each day and creating a more loving, kind world and community. So how we use holistic management is with, like, for example, each spring we will plan out we will use holistic management, and there is different ways to use holistic management, such as like the holistic planned grazing. So each spring we will plan out our grazing for the year, and it also gets replanned and planned and all of that. But at the spring we'll start and we'll walk through the process of holistic planned grazing, and using that process, we can then manage our animals throughout the year that in a way that cycles carbon, draws it down into the ground, increases biodiversity, helps have abundance of wildlife, have an abundance of forage for the animals, and also producing incredible beef and lamb. So that's an example of one way how we use holistic management. One other thing I kind of wanted to talk about is regenerative agriculture, and there's many different ways and principles and thoughts of how to do it. There's holistic plant, there's biodynamics, there's permaculture, like there's many different ways to do it. but at its core, there's so much hope in regenerative agriculture, and I really don't lose hope. And I see that hope every day with regenerative agriculture and holistic management, because we are drawing carbon down. We are creating an abundance of feed that not only feeds our cattle and sheep, but also our wildlife. Like at Parker Pastures, this summer, there was counted over 44 different species of birds, which is incredible. And there's just so much hope with holistic management and regenerative agriculture. And it also spreads much farther than the land. And that is something that I'm grateful for and thankful to be part of, because it's not just regenerating our land and our soils, which is very important, but because of regenerating our land and healing our soils, we are able to heal our communities and create a better world, because we are caring for our land, and then that land in return cares for us. So there's a lot of hope. And if you need a little hope right now, then know that through regenerative agriculture and holistic management, there is hope, and there is abundance in life and wildlife thriving, and incredible products like beef and lamb and pork being produced. And there is also this community that is expanding, and it's worldwide, of incredible ranchers, but it's also of consumers and eaters and people who want to be a part of that incredible, regenerative, life-giving, abundant community. So that is kind of all that I had to talk about today.
Thanks so much, Chloe. It's really awesome to hear from you. And I know you could also share with us your day-to-day rituals of moving a lot of fence amongst garnering all that hope. So I'm sure we can hear from you more. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm excited to hear what questions people pose to you. And people could pose a question now in the chat to Chloe directly, because we have a little more time, or yeah, let's give a few minutes if you have a question directly for Chloe, and then we can transition to hearing from Bill in just a few minutes. All right, so we have two questions, and maybe we'll decide to wrap these up more once we hear from everyone, but I'll pose them now. So Dana asks, how is the carbon sequestration measurement across your entire ranch going? And then David asks, what resources are out there to help with an operation transition to holistic grazing? So I think let's keep those questions more towards until we hear from some more panelists, because I think people will be able to follow through on those. How does that sound, Chloe?
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Okay, one that is coming in from Meredith looks specific towards your operation, Chloe, and it is, how big are your herd sizes and do you overwinter?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with our cattle, we have a finishing operation, and then we have a cow-calf operation. And we take all of our animals out of Gunnison for the winter, because it gets really cold in Gunnison. And with our beef operation, they fatten a lot better. So they'll be going to like Montrose and Grand Junction, and anywhere where it's just a little bit warmer. So that is how we winter the animals. And then for herd sizes, our beef operation this year is around 300 head of cattle. And then we have a smaller cow-calf operation, about 100 mama cows. And then my lamb operation fluctuates throughout the seasons, just with different demands and stuff like that. This year, I'm off the top of my head, it's probably about 300 lambs. Yeah, so that's kind of a little bit about what our herd sizes are. And yep, we definitely do not overwinter in Gunnison.
Great. And it looks like Kelly's answering some questions about the sheep fence that you use. Any last comment, Chloe, on your fencing strategy or overwintering?
I'll just go a little more into the fencing just for a minute. So we use electric fence, and it is easy for us to move, and it's portable, so we can build a fence and then take it down and then graze a totally different way and different area next year, which is really good for the land. So we typically run our cattle and sheep together in the summer on a 2-wire electric fence. And so a lot of the summer and spring and fall even are spent like building and taking down electric fence. And then we're moving the animals in the height of the summer about every day to fresh pasture. So that's kind of a little more about our fencing.
Thanks, Chloe. And I think it will be a great segue into hearing from Bill Parker.
Thank you. Yeah, it's always exciting to hear Chloe excited about what's going on. And also these pictures are driving me nuts as we move into fall and things are turning brown and winter is upon us, and looking at all the green grass that is gone. But I did wanted to clarify that MJ did a great job of a 5-minute or whatever it was of holistic management, and there is so much to it to explain in a short time. But I wanted to clarify that the first part is creating our holistic context, whether it's your family, your business, your organization, and your context is really trying to define the life that you want to have, that trying to define how you want your land, how you want your community, how you want, defining what we really want. And ultimately, when we all really think about that and get down layer to layer to layer, we all want the same things, right? We all want peace. We all want love. We all want community. We all want clean water. We all want nutritious food. And so that's the first step of holistic management, is really defining what we want. And then we make decisions towards that. And we measure our decisions if they are taking us towards that holistic context or moving us away. When you compare that to how most decisions are made in our culture, usually we are addressing a problem, and we're making decisions to how to solve the problem. And always there's unintended consequences to any decision we make. And so if we're making decisions based off of a problem, we're not necessarily moving ourselves in the way that we want to go. So anyway, I think holistic management is very grounded in land use and land management and grazing, but it's something that can be used for a family or a person or organization that has no land business or grazing animals or things, because ultimately we need to think holistically. And that is a challenge because, through our schooling, through science, we're kind of taught to try to eliminate variables and ecosystems, communities, our brains, we can't eliminate variables. There's always different things interplaying, and to try to think holistically and understand what are the consequences of each decision we make, and are they moving towards what we want to do. um, so anyway, of course, our one of our main goals and part of our context of holistic management with Parker Pastures, like Chloe said, is we want to leave the land and people that we encounter in a better place than when we found them. So we lease all the ground that we use. We don't own any ranch land, and there was a question earlier about measuring the carbon sequestration, and that is something that we have not done very well. Thank goodness that we have through our Savory Hub, we have the um, two guys that are going around and doing the land monitoring to measure soil carbon, to measure species diversity, to measure bare ground. I say bare ground because we have a lot of talk and a lot of money spent and a lot of time spent on weeds. And weeds we like to look at as succession. Weeds are covering bare ground. Bare ground is truly the enemy, because if we're talking about carbon, the only vehicle to get carbon in a stable form is through photosynthesis. So guess what? A weed can do that. Bare ground not do that. So, we like to see, just like within ourselves on the land, it's a process of evolving into a better state. And weeds are something that are trying to take bare ground, make that land more suitable for better plants that can feed wildlife, feed livestock, and sequester carbon, because that's how carbon sequestration happens, is through photosynthesis. And then through that photosynthesis, taking that carbon deep into the roots. And the way that we use holistic management, one of the biggest things, like MJ talked about it as one of the 4 key insights, and that it's timing. Timing is everything. Like, for the last 150 years, we've managed land and our grazing principles based on animal numbers. And that was the big driver of whether we were moving our land forward or backwards. Unfortunately, this thinking has led us in a reverse direction, because, as MJ mentioned, if you're walking around anywhere you live, it looked like everybody was in a brittle environment, Western United States. And so if you see grass plants that are oxidizing, like MJ said, that's turning gray. That's that carbon that those plants sequestered, and now it's slowly being released through oxidation, a chemical process, back into the atmosphere. Versus, that's why our animals are our greatest tools available to us, because they take that carbon, and through all the microbiology in their stomach, they are moving that carbon back onto the soil into a form that hopefully, if there's microorganisms in the soil, can bring it back down to the soil. But it's the plants, their roots, we think of it as the carbon pump. And this whole timing thing is, we want to allow a long recovery period for our plants. Like, if we graze them, that's great. Plants, especially grass plants, are designed to be grazed. Their growth points are low to the soil. But once it's grazed, we got to get the animals out of there, let that plant fully recover. That's our carbon pump. The bigger the plant we can get above ground, the more roots we have below ground, and that's just massive amount of carbon. And then if you have a healthy biological community in your soil, those are turning those roots and what the plant turned from carbon dioxide into stable carbon, they're turning that into the soil, into plant food and stable humus, which holds great amount of water. I think it's for 1% organic matter that we change on our soils, we can hold 26,000 more gallons per acre of water. And that is kind of like the key right now, as you know, we are in a drought. All of the Western United States is in a terrible drought. You know, from the livestock side, that means feed costs are going through the roof. The demand for animals is going through the floor, and the value of our animals are going down because there's not the available food to feed these animals. But you know, with what we're doing, where we're trying to allow those plants to grow big, and then we never want to graze all that plant. You know, we want to put plant back onto the soil surface to feed those microorganisms. And so over the years of doing that on this particular property where we are now, that we lease from the city of Gunnison, you know, we're increasing that organic matter in the soil. So we're increasing our water holding capacity, and we're increasing our nutrients in our soil, and we're growing more grass. And that is better for everyone. You know, it's better for, and that's like what Chloe was saying, you know, there is possibility for abundance on this earth. You know, I think we get trapped in thinking of these overpopulation and terrible thoughts of that we can't support the number of humans that are on the planet. But we see very, very clearly with holistic management and the practitioners all across the world that we are capable of producing much, much, much more from each acre of land, and you know, providing for all of the humans that are on this earth. I'm not keeping track of time, so somebody has to help me there.
I think it's right on time, Bill, where we can hear from Sarah, and I'm sure we'll come back to hear more from you as people pose questions. So thanks so much, Bill.
I don't know, Bill was on a roll there. I think we can just let him keep going. So I just jump right in, huh? My name is Sarah Gleason. I am the owner and operator and grunt work person for Gleason Bison, which is a holistically managed grass-fed bison operation committed to serving our community, regenerating our environment, and producing thriving animals. I'm located in Hesperus, Colorado, which is about 15 miles from downtown Durango, Colorado. So right in the Southwest. This has been such a good conversation. I was actually thinking about the holistic context before Bill jumped in there. And that's for holistic management. For me, the holistic context is really where it starts. It's the foundation, the cornerstone of holistic management, because how can you manage for something or towards something if you haven't defined that something? So getting on paper a holistic context, which writes out, you know, the quality, kind of like Bill was saying, just like Bill was saying, the quality of life that we desire, what we want our future resource base to look like, the behaviors that we need to embrace in order to create that future resource base. It really creates this guiding light that then allows us to use the rest of the planning procedures that have been mentioned, the holistic financial planning, the holistic grazing planning, and the holistic land planning. So really that holistic context is a core component. My background is not in agriculture. Full transparency, I became a full-time rancher in January. Before that, I worked for the Savory Institute and Allen Savory with ranchers and farmers like the Parkers and MJ and others all over the world. And so for me, the last 10 months has been an opportunity to practice everything that I had preached and talked about for the past 5 years with the Savory Institute. Interestingly, my first real life grazing plan, and people have mentioned grazing planning and how it's different. And truly it's very different, planning out the moves, where we're going to be. And then, you know, the biggest piece of that is monitoring what's going on and then replanning and adjusting according to what's going on. So we don't just create these grazing plans and then follow them without a second thought. We actually monitor and see, is the next pasture recovered? Is it ready to go there? Do we need to stay in this pasture? What's going on? And then making those adjustments. So interestingly, there's actually a non-growing season grazing plan and a growing season grazing plan, which makes sense, right? If plants aren't growing anymore, you're going to have a different plan about where you are when than if you're in the growing season and they are recovering more quickly. So we have entered into the non-growing season here in Southwest Colorado, and my animals and my herd just arrived last month. And so my first grazing plan is the next 6 months non-growing season grazing plan, which is interesting because one, I have never grazed this place before, so I have no historical knowledge. And two, we're in a major drought. And three, this place was actually grazed over the summer by a neighbor who does beef cows and does not manage holistically. And so they were really kind of just let to roam, graze this land really, really hard. And then we did not get the monsoons that allowed for regrowth. So we have very little feed. The take half, leave half that some of you might have heard as far as forage was not applied this summer. So it's an interesting situation to be in, but the grazing plan will allow me to at least know where the animals are going to be when. And the other decision-making tools like holistic financial planning and my holistic context will then help me make decisions based on all those different factors to create the outcomes and the life that I want over the next 6 months and longer. For me, the reason that I do holistic management, one is that's the only thing I know. Similar to Chloe, I was blessed with the training from the start of you manage holistically, and this is sort of how it's done. But more than that, I've seen what can happen when managing this way. There's a saying that it's cheaper to grow a second ranch than buy a second ranch. And that really resonates with me when I'm always thinking about more space and more land and more forage. As I run Bison, utilizing permits on federal lands is not usually an option. And so for me, I'm constantly thinking about more land. And so sometimes I need to reframe that thought and think, how can I actually produce more and grow myself a second ranch? And we can do that through intentional planned grazing. Holistic management has also been shown, like MJ mentioned, to help with effective water cycles. The more I do this and the longer I'm in this space, the more I realize that it's all about water. And more so as we do climate change and here out west, it's just all about water. In the picture on the screen, most of my water comes from that snow melt that's on the mountains. And if it's a bad snow year, there are dire consequences to that. And if our monsoon season doesn't come, dire consequences. So holistic management has shown to make water cycles 30% more effective. So that means that, in short, when it rains, we can actually utilize 30% more water than managing conventionally. Although I don't like to use that conventional because it's my hope and dream that someday the conventional way of managing will be holistically. But anyways, so like Bill said, bare ground is really the enemy, right? Rain falls, it hits bare ground, most likely it's going to evaporate or run off. So how do we solve bare ground, even if it is weeds or shrubs or even cactus in my case? That's kind of a last resort. And then also for soil health, I love soil health and soil biology and like to geek out on that. I like to find dung beetles. I like to we just submitted soil carbon samples, and we're utilizing something on our place called ecological outcome verification. We call it EOV. And in brief, EOV is a methodology that was developed in partnership with the Savory Institute, Michigan State University, another university in Australia, an organization in Chile and Argentina, all combined together to make a globally contextually relevant way of measuring soil health with empirical data. And so rather than just following a list of practices and assuming good things happen because of them, we can actually monitor multiple different indicators, anywhere between 15 to 25 indicators that give us both leading and lagging data and information on what is happening at the soil level. And so that's really exciting to me because I want to be able to say with data and with proof that I am actually bettering the environment by using the tool of grazing animals. And so that really I get geeked out on soil health. So, and we can't manage what we don't measure, and so that's a big thing for me also. With holistic management, we are constantly monitoring and learning and evolving what we're doing and learning from the land and observing. Alan Savory says that, you know, we're constantly learning, and each of our ranches is just another learning site to see what works and what doesn't. And so I'm really embracing that, especially since I'm actually new to putting this into practice, that it is a learning process. Yeah, in short, we sell, like Bill said, we, in the bison industry, we too are feeling high hay costs, low animal sale prices. Historically, I've sold calves and cull animals. And this fall, I'm diving into selling meat for the first time direct to consumer. So that's a new space for me. A little nervous about it, but it's also something I want to do to serve my community and also meets my financial context as well. So I think that's probably about it. Is that my time? And I forgot to watch.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. That is a great explanation of where you are and your learning process. And we'll look to see if folks have questions directly for you, or we'll just open it up after we hear from MJ.
Sure. I was just going to mention, I didn't talk too much about bison specifically, but if people do have bison specific questions, that's fine as well.
Great. All right, I'll try to make mine a little bit shorter just to keep us on time. But I, as well as being the hub, one of the hub leaders with the CRN, I also co-own Calder Farm with my husband, and we do pasture-raised hogs in Gunnison. Hogs are really interesting. They are not ungulates, so their diet is not entirely made up of grass, but we still use holistic management and those key insights to help us make our decisions around evaluating the land, monitoring the land, so we can increase our soil health, increase water holding capacity, that sort of thing. So hogs are really interesting. We use them more in the realm of animal impact rather than for grazing. They only graze, I think it's about less than 25% of their diet is made up of grass. They need a little bit more diverse of a diet. So we supplement with spent grain as well as pre-consumer food waste. That does a few things for us. It meets our context of helping to create a more circular economy. So instead of the food going directly to a landfill, we're actually creating more food with that food. But the animals really help us move our land that we lease towards our goal of more regenerative. So it's a little bit of a different situation in how we manage and how we have to move our animals across a landscape, but really interesting and really intriguing. We have this great example. One of the first pieces of property we started to lease with our hogs had thistle, Canada thistle, that was about 6 feet high. And it was a really big issue for this landowner. And typically what's done for Canada thistle is they're just sprayed with chemicals, and they enter the water stream and all of that. And so we proposed using pigs to help move that thistle environment towards a more grassy and meadow-like environment that was surrounding the area. And what we found was that our pigs go after the roots, which is how Canada thistle spreads, and has helped to almost completely eradicate the thistle in that area and move it towards a more perennial grassland meadow. So it's been really interesting to see how these animals which typically have a really bad reputation for being smelly, for being really destructive, that sort of thing. People don't want pigs near their property. If managed correctly, we can use those hog traits, those pigginess traits, to move a landscape in a direction that is outlined by our holistic context or our holistic goal, and is not smelly. And we're using their rootiness, their ability to uproot plants for a benefit. So yeah, my husband and I, we try to keep our herd we're pretty small. It's about 40 hogs. We do farrow to finish. So we, birth them, raise them until they're finished, and then sell mostly direct to consumer. We are part of a few wholesale accounts, but 95% of our sales are direct to consumer. And we lease all of the land, much like the Parkers, that we run our animals on. So it's not just about our goal of improving the landscape, but also the goal of our partners who lease their land to us. So holistic management and holistic planned grazing has been a really great tool to help lift up those connections, help increase, the ecosystem viability and resiliency in our valley, which again goes back to our holistic context. So I'm happy to talk more about pigs, but I know we only have a limited amount of time for open questions. So I'll end there and then let Annie and Kelly dictate the questions we're all answering.
Great. Thanks so much, MJ. It's been really cool to see a description of hog operation, a bison operation, cattle and lamb, and to remember the distinction that hogs aren't ungulates, and they function a bit differently. And from knowing you personally, we've been talking about what it'd be like to have hogs kind of follow cattle, to start to mix in all the cattle waste into the soil and use the different mechanisms of different properties of different animals layering on top of one another. So that's been fun to think about. And now I'd like to open it into our question and answer session, where we'll have the next 25 minutes. And this is the final slide that I'll share, and then we'll end the slideshow. This is just a thank you to the 350 Colorado Network for hosting us. And for more folks that do want to look to learn about our network, the Colorado Regenerative Network, we're a program of the Cold Harbor Institute, which is located in Gunnison. And if you want to screenshot this or write down coldharborinstitute.org, you'll be able to find one of our programs to follow up with the Colorado Regenerative Network, and MJ just put it in the chat. Thank you. And then we can end the slideshow so we can just finish with a conversation. And we've gotten some chats coming in, and I appreciate them coming in via the chat. And I'll kind of circle back to what people have started with, and then we'll come back to the most recent one. So if you're thinking of a question, please type it out in the chat and we'll pose it to our panelists. And panelists, if you see one that you really want to answer, please jump in and go ahead and answer or reply to the chat directly. But I'm going to go kind of back to the beginning to make sure I'm not missing a question from folks. And the first one that came from Dana was regarding how carbon sequestration is measured across the entire ranch, and that was to Chloe. And then I think Bill brought that in, where Bill talked about the verifiers that we have within the network. So those are, and then Sarah brought it up again, the ecological outcome verification, which is a tool that is developed and used by Savory. And so I might just be like rounding this out right now, where we might not need to add on at the moment, but that is a process that we are using within the network to look at the ecological outcomes that are being met and see how that is changing every 2 to 5 to 10 years. Any panelists feel like they want to talk more about that, or it seems like it's been covered? Anybody wanting to spend a little more time on that? Okay. Phil looks like he's chatting it up, but you're on mute. Yes.
Sorry,
okay.
now can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Sorry. Well, I do think that at some point soon, we hopefully will be paid for the carbon that we are storing long-term in the soil, as a revenue source for producers. And, this really excites me in the livestock side of things and in the farming side of things, which I don't know much about, but I know there's huge potential there. And, if we can buy carbon that is being stored in the soil, somebody that's doing that because it's being extracted at another source, and we could start to balance that, much like water. We've talked about water a lot, but Colorado water law is very complex, and there's new programs coming on with that, in which we can send water downstream because we are increasing our carbon content in our soil, so we can hold more water, more drought resiliency, so we can divert less, send it down the creek, and get paid for that. So there's programs like that, and I think soon we'll have programs for getting paid for carbon. That way it's not just some tax that's going somewhere to somebody. It's actually going to the place where that carbon is being sequestered. So anyway, I look forward to sort of those free market mechanisms that will reward the people that are sequestering carbon, and the people that are maybe emitting much can offset that through the producers that can sequester it.
Thanks. And EOV, ecological outcome verification, is moving towards that, where they're doing this data collection to really show that that carbon is in the ground and staying in the ground. And it's an interesting context regarding leases too, where it depends on how long your leases are to really determine how long that carbon is staying in the ground and protected. And so I'm sure that's a whole nother factor to determine how these markets will evolve, and farmers and ranchers can participate them. And maybe there will be roles with different conservation or regenerative leasing agreements that we're starting to see come up. And I'm having some more questions come up, and one follow-up from that, that was message from Kelly to Bill, is how long you let a land rest before grazing again.
Well, that's something that only took us 10 years to figure out. Maybe we still don't have it figured out, but of course, that is something that's a moving target, right? We've got slow growth in the spring and the fall. We've got fast growth during the longest periods of the longest day lengths. And so the grass is growing, the forage is growing at different rates. And what we're looking for is that plant to be fully recovered, which means almost going into seed setting. Once it goes into seed setting, then that energy is going totally into the seed. And, there's kind of a point right before that plant has done all that it can do, and we can graze it and then get off of it. And like Sarah mentioned, we don't want to take half, leave half, or we do want to do that. Like with our finishing animals, we want to only take the top third of the plant. So that means we're leaving number one, we're taking the top third of the plant because that's where the most energy is in the plant. The reason we feed corn to cattle and feedlots to make them fat faster is because corn has a lot of energy. Well, if we're grazing where we're only grazing the top third of that plant, we're capturing the most energy in this forage system. And so with our beef animals that we're fattening, or sheep, whatever it is, if we're taking only the top third of that plant, we're leaving the bottom 2/3 for that recovery. We can go back in there maybe 60 days, but we've kind of, like on our irrigated place in Gunnison is a short growing season, but we kind of started at like a 30-day recovery period, and through our monitoring we recognized maybe this isn't long enough. We bumped it up to 45, then we bumped it up to 60, and now this year we're trying to get like a 90-day recovery period. So we're wanting to allow 90 days on irrigated pasture for those plants to fully recover before we're going back in there and grazing it. And that, I think, is really allowing us to increase the draw on the carbon pump. So we're getting those plants as big as we can before we graze them, capturing the most carbon, the most energy, and then we graze them. And same thing, like if we're in the growing season, we want to graze the plants up. We never want to like graze a plant down while we're still in the growing season. Like especially with a short growing season, we want to allow as much growing as we can. And versus in the dormant season, then we can kind of cycle through. Same thing, we can cycle through with a 90-day recovery or 60-day recovery. And there we're not recovering from plants, like letting the plants grow back, but we're letting that area sort of freshen back up. And instead of leaving the cattle in there where they dung and urinated and then they don't want to eat the grass, we can rotate it out of there, come back later, it's freshened back up, and we can still harvest it down. So we graze it up in the growing season and graze it down during the dormant season. But okay, we're in a drought, so should we graze everything down in our dormant season? No, we might not have moisture next spring. So we want to reserve a drought reserve. And that way we know we'll have forage for our animals in the spring, and hopefully we'll get some sort of growing season. But of course we want to save forage all the time. So that means leaving a drought reserve.
And it's also important to realize that all of our land bases are so different. So here in Gunnison, we typically only have cool season growing grasses, but there's other places in Colorado that have warm season grasses that come up at different times. So knowing your land base, knowing your grasses, really can help determine resting periods for you and your goals.
Nice. Thank you. I think that helps to tie into a question. Let me see who posed it, from Dana, about combating bare ground. And I think Sarah would like to directly answer this. And I'm going to pose on an additional question that folks have asked, that David has asked, about what are some of, maybe Sarah, you could share a resource that you really like in learning about regenerative ranching. So somebody who's looking to transition their outfit into a holistic grazing plan. So first, if you could talk about how you address bare ground, and then share about one of your favorite resources for transitions.
You bet. Dana, that's a great question. And I love it because it lets us actually practice holistic decision making in brief. So this question of how do we combat bare ground? First, I always like to say that we manage for what we want, not for what we don't want. And that seems like a simple, like nuanced thing, but it's actually really important in really trying to manage and create the conditions that allow what we want to thrive. There's a really amazing rancher named Tony Malmberg, who's a holistic management practitioner, and he likes to ask the question, what life can we add when there's a problem, versus the mentality of like, what do we need to kill, like weeds or pests and things like that, but what life do we need to add? So we know that we want to manage 4 covered soils because of all the reasons people have talked about, right? You know, healthy soils, water retention, yada, yada. So how do we create healthy soils? The bridged version is there's lots of ways we can do that, right? You could plant, you could do no-till drilling. I think there's some grants right now that are doing native Colorado Plateau seed grants, and you could do no-till drills and try to get things to grow there. There's also bale grazing, which is something that I'm exploring, where I purchase hay that is grass that I want to have growing on this land that's from around here locally. It has seed heads in it that I would like to see germinate, and I'm going to bale graze and put this big bales of hay on places where it's bare soil, and then I'm going to have animals come in and graze it and trample it, and we're going to cover those soils and create a better microbial habitat with dung and urine and decomposting hay on those places to try to get, you know, more ground cover. There's also the thought of, which I'm definitely going to do because it's the most economically viable, is using your animals. And so we can create more intense animal impact on land that has bare ground to try to germinate the seed bank that already exists. So in almost all of our land out here, anywhere, there's usually decades and decades and centuries of seed bank already existing in our soils. And so what are the conditions? What is the, you know, bacterial and acidic level of our soils? What is the impact and the disturbance that needs to happen to allow those seeds that already exist to germinate? And that's something we can do solely with the use of our animals. But all these things are tools in a toolbox. And so we have to decide which ones are the best to use for us. And so there's actually 7 different testing questions in holistic management, and I won't take us through all of them right now. But one of them is root cause. You know, does this tool that we're thinking about using address the root cause? One is marginal reaction. Is this going to create the best marginal reaction for what we're trying to create? There's a gross profit, GPA, gross profit and analysis, Bill, margin, gross profit analysis. You know, is the money we're putting into this going to give us the best bang for our buck? And then the last one that I love the best is even gut check. You know, does this really jive with what we want to be doing? Do I want to be no-till drilling, planting out on hundreds of acres of land? Or would I rather focus on grazing animals first? So I know that was quick. I feel like I talked really quick, but it's a really great example of there's lots of ways and lots of tools that we can address various things that we want to do on our land. And then we get to use the holistic decision-making framework to choose what is best and what's going to actually give us the results we want versus potential unintended consequences, whether that's unintended consequences ecologically, financially, socially, down the road. So that's an abridged version. For the resources, there's actually 5 online courses you can take through the Savory Institute website. I took them, and for me, it was great because it allowed me to learn the concepts before I started doing the actual planning, so that I wasn't both learning concepts and planning procedures at the same time. And then beyond that, holistic planned grazing, holistic land planning, holistic financial planning, and holistic ecological monitoring are the 4 workshops that are best done in person from an educator. So Cloe Parker is an educator. There's phenomenal holistic management educators all over the country who will actually host. You can actually take them through Cold Harbor Institute, the Savory Hub, and will actually host these workshops where then you have face-to-face time actually doing the planning procedures to learn them. And that is invaluable. And then beyond that, which I've worked for Savory Institute, I've done the workshops, yet still I meet with somebody who's more of an expert than I am to review my plan and see if they can see holes where I can't. And that's my favorite tool.
And if I can just plug, you know, the CRN, we offer an online peer-to-peer network. So you're not only connecting with folks like Bill and Chloe and Kelly and Sarah, but you're also connecting with other folks on this holistic management journey and can troubleshoot together. And this is what I'm seeing. So that's all at the link, and I'll stop the plug there.
I like it. I should have plugged that harder, MJ.
From Bill or Chloe, do y'all have a resource that's really inspired you that you would want to pass along to other folks into taking a next step?
I think one of the most amazing things is to go to different operations and to, go and see what people have been able to do, hear their stories of how the land has changed, how their quality of life has changed, how their income has changed. And I don't know, to me, that's always like, we were a part of Ranching for Profit for a long time and probably back, but that's a organization that's very similar to holistic management in terms of the principles. And we work together with a small group of different ranchers, and we always went to a different place every year, a different ranch. And for me, that's probably the best learning experience I've ever had, is just to go to places and spend time there and understanding what changes they've made, how it's affected them, and getting that boots on the ground experience of seeing what's happening. And of course, there's so many reading materials, the courses, but at the end of the day, you gotta go see some places.
Great. And I think I'll kind of leave with one last question, where Aaron had posed, can you talk about your soil or ecosystem health before and after you started a holistic management practice? And maybe that's even something you saw a shift in this year, or if you had a good idea of before on a land. What were some characteristics that are really standing out to you, or processes that you've been able to witness?
Well, I guess I'll jump in. We've rented a property east of Gunnison for probably 12 years, and it's got junior water rights, so that is a little bit of an inhibitor. But the largest inhibitor when we took over was that previously the property was grazed with horses year round, and not very many horses. Like, for example, we've ran, I don't know, over 300 cattle on that property, but there was maybe 15 horses on that property before. And, because the timing was all the time, the numbers were lower. That property was probably 75% bare ground with scattered grass plants that were very unhealthy. And in 12 years, we have the soil surface completely covered, whether it's living plants or litter from decaying plants. And we have changed the production threefold. So, that's just a pretty blatant example of, just a change in management, and all of a sudden there's 3 or 4 times more production. And that same property, we see sage grouse, we see deer. That's where my boys like to go hunting near, because the wildlife recognize that and benefit from it as well.
And I'll just quickly share that even with pigs, right, we're leasing properties where even after 1, 2, or 3 seasons, neighbors are saying the birds are back and they hadn't been there for years and years. Or wildlife is using the property now for resting or nesting, hunting, whatever it may be. And to me, those are really great indicators that the land is in a healthier state now that it's being managed this way, and is trending towards supporting more life. So those are just quick little anecdotes, but something we're definitely seeing more and more of.
I think I'll wrap it up there, y'all. Thank you so much for making it through this fast 75 minutes of an intro to land regeneration through holistic planned grazing, and for our audience to join in with your curiosity and interest to hear the stories from these very skilled practitioners, and to learn about our network in Colorado. And we'd like to invite you to stay connected with the Colorado Regenerative Network. And I'd also love to invite y'all to stay connected with 350 Colorado Local Food and Regenerative Ag Committee. The committee meets once a month, and it's full of volunteers, and we're all just zooming in to talk about local food and regenerative agriculture across the state. And it was so wonderful to be able to share my relationships with the Colorado Regenerative Network from Gunnison and Hesperus with Sarah and Gleason Bison, and the Parkers, and MJ with Calder Farm. So thank you all so much for sharing your insights beyond Gunnison Valley, and with some folks that joined in from Gunnison Valley. And feel free to reach out to us with any questions or follow-ups, and surely we'd love to share more in the future using our virtual platforms. So thanks again, Michaela, for all of your support and helping us host.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you to all of the panelists. Thank you, Annie, so much. That was such an information-rich and just inspiring conversation. I hope everyone took away from it as much as I did. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I did put my email in the chat for everyone else, and I'll go ahead and drop it in there again. I lead the Regenerative Ag and Local Food Committee. So if you have any further questions for the panelists, or you're interested in joining the committee, or you want to connect with Annie, just send me an email and I'll get you connected to who you want to be with. Thank you.
Thank y'all. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.